Right, well, I'm conscious that I'm standing between you and coffee, although you might not want to have too much coffee, given what Vanessa said about the toilet, say. So I think we've had, sorry, try to lower the tone. So before I chat to the panel about putting the where back into planning, which was very lovely set up from Richard there, and I didn't realise till just beforehand that he was going to do that. I think we've had a fascinating couple of sessions so far. We sort of talked a little bit about the what of some of the problems that perhaps the industry is facing in terms of short-termism, and Richard has neatly talked to us about the who and the why. So I'm going to carry on with the W and talk about the where. And sort of have a little, before I talk to the panel about that, as Vanessa said, I just want to give you a little bit of an update on a very massive long-term project that we've been working on Group M with. Now, it seems to me that, she said, putting it onto the proper slide, it seems to me that in the olden days, and I mean maybe 10 or 15 years ago, not eons ago, the media planning was based on some fundamental principles that as to how and where and why you should advertise. And it feels like the advent of the internet has sort of dismantled some of those principles that, in a way, that we don't need to worry about where we advertise anymore. But we believe, and our hypothesis at Newsworks is that the same person, so you're just chasing a person wherever they are, but that same person can have very different responses depending on where they see the advertising. So context and the where has been one of the big focuses of the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years. And potentially the biggest of those is our project with Group M. It's a three-way partnership, so with the Newsworks team, with Group M and their digital team and their analysts, and also all of our individual Newsworks stakeholders. We're all in this together. And our hypothesis is we're not trying to say from the outset and assume that the publisher environment is a quality one, but our hypothesis is that it is. And so we're using this project to prove that where you advertise makes a big difference to consumer outtake of the brands and consumer response. And that quality is not, it's across the publisher board. So, I love the stuff that Richard talked about in terms of, the sample of one. Our definition of quality is not going to be the same as other people's definition of quality. So it's sort of trying to say that in trusted environments where people have a relationship with the publication, then there is a difference in terms of the response that comes from that. It's a really, really complex project, so I'm going to try and do a bit of Carol Vorderman here. So we'll see how we go on. It's built up from the individual campaign impression level, so right down to the most granular piece of the jigsaw puzzle that you can get. And what happens is that every impression, along with all of the other tags that they have to put on it, every impression is tagged with a matrix tag, which is behavioral response. So things like how long they spend on the page, do they hover over the ad, is the ad in view for the whole time, all of those sorts of things. And then it's also tagged with a Cint tag. Now, Cint are a global survey panel provider. And what happens is that when somebody is exposed to the ad and we can deem that they're exposed, then we look at what happens with their behavioral response, so all of those things that I've just mentioned. And then if they are matched as a Cint panel person, then they get surveyed a very short brand response questionnaire. And then we compare that to the publisher environment, the quality environment, versus run of the internet. And we see how likely is that profile, which metrics are important in driving better brand uplifts. And if they are important, how likely are they to be found in the publisher environment versus run of the internet? So one of my big bugbears is that people treat digital as this amorphous mass, and it's not. There is lots of great content, there's lots of bad content. So let's see if we can use this project to separate some of the good from the bad. So it's a wide range of brands that are included, and these are the ones that have taken part so far. We are really keen that this is widely applicable across a whole host of different industries. it's a lot of data. So if we're building it up from individual campaign impression level, then we deal with a lot of data. Fortunately, the Group M analytics team are amazing at that. So to date, and we started this project last September after last year conducting a proof of concept test to see if it would work. 25 completed campaigns, 16 are currently live. We estimate we're about halfway through, and we are in February, so we're sort of 6 months in. So this is, but this has got to be robust. If we are going to change some of the attitudes and behaviours in the industry, then we've got to give really robust and solid evidence for that. So we've got 218 million impressions so far, which is quite a lot. The proof of concept test was 37 million, but we still don't think with 218 million we've got enough, because actually when you get down to it, you need to find enough panel members to respond, etc. So but we have had 13,190 fully amazing survey responses. We have had more than that. But one of the things that's important is, and this is getting probably a little bit detailed, but one of the things that's important is if you are going to look at the behavioural response to an impression and match it to the brand response, then it needs to be after a single exposure, otherwise you can't link the two. So we have had some survey responses where people have been exposed to the ad more than once, but we need to be absolutely confident about linking the behavioural and the brand metrics. So, as I say, we're only part of the way through this, so I'm going to give you just a little bit of a taster of some of the data, and we'll come back later in our effectiveness summit later in July to give you a lot more. So which behavioural metrics are vital? These are just some of the ones that we look at. And one of the things I think is important is these are sort of indicators. If we treat them as indicators rather than the end in themselves, then that's important. Which ones actually drive some change in attitudes? So I'm just going to show you a couple. This is whether people hover over the ad, and it gives uplifts in brand awareness, recall, and recommendation intent. So early indications are that actually the publisher environment, that actually hover is one of the most influential behavioural metrics, and certainly we find that in the proof of concept test as well. One of the great things about having loads more data than we did in the proof of concept test is that we can look at combinations of metrics, because it's not just one versus the other. It's, well, if the ad's in view, 100% in view and everybody can see it, does it matter if they see it for 1 second, or does it matter if they see it for 30 seconds? And actually there is an uplift the longer you see it for. And I think, we've there's been a lot of talk about just seeing things for 1 or 2 seconds, and actually, sometimes longer is better. And actually, the early indications again are that the quality environment drives greater response than the open exchange or the run of the internet. So just on a basic level, the exposure is more likely to be measurable. You're less likely to have 0 pixels in view. I mean, I think that's pretty standard, isn't it? It's pretty good to have that. And people are more likely to look at the ads in view for longer. So, we're sort of part of the way there, but it's certainly given us the confidence that it's better to be in the quality publisher environment. Now, the other thing we want to do is take it right through to cost effectiveness. It's all very well, all of these results that, or some of the little that I'm able to show you today, but is it cost effective? Now, we've not been able to do that yet with the main data set, but going back to the proof of concept test, we were able to look at the cost effectiveness of the quality environment. So looking at what's the cost of achieving those quality exposures, because I think there's a false economy in trying to go cheap as chips with your advertising. So I'm just picking a couple out. So lower is better. So actually it's more expensive to get those quality exposures in the open exchange because actually they're less likely to be there. And getting a longer exposure to the ad, again, it's more expensive in the open exchange or the run of the internet. There were 1 or 2 measures in the proof of concept test where it was sort of near on the same, one of which was above or below the fold. But again, that was 5 campaigns, 37 million impressions. We are aiming for about 70 to 80 campaigns and probably something in the region of 350 to 400 million impressions. So it's a big job, but it is important that we do it, that we prove the value of the quality media environment. So that's enough from me. I'm going to come and chat to my lovely panel. Actually, let me get my questions. That would help. And just sort of, first of all, I'm just going to get a little bit of their response to this, and then we'll go on to some of the debate around putting the where back into planning. So welcome, and thank you very much for sitting through me waffling on there. What do you think about that? What's your sort of, you've not seen it before, I didn't send it to you purposely, so you get your immediate kind of off-the-cuff reaction.
I think it's good to see, I think implicitly you've got to believe that context adds value and adds potency to the message, or makes your message more compelling. But it's great to have the evidence there, and now we can take this out to clients and we can show them we're not just telling you this. There's hard evidence behind it, and there's rigor. You've got millions and millions of impressions, multiple campaigns. This is an ongoing piece of research, so it's only going to become more robust, and you'll be able to cut it and slice it in lots of different ways. So it's I'm not surprised by it, and I'm encouraged by it. So.
I think I'd echo the not surprised by it, actually, because I think if we talk about context, I think context is not just the where, it's the why as well. And to do a really bad sample of one, when I'm reading a news brand's on a news brands platform, and I'm reading a kind of article or something like that, then actually, the mindset I'm in, the mood I'm in, where I am, kind of what I want from the experience is very, very sort of different to other online journeys I may be making. And unsurprisingly, I'm probably more open and receptive because of that mood and that mindset and the environment. So it, to me, is not surprising, but very nice to have the numbers behind it.
Louise?
And as a client, I am interested in that information coming through in the context of what else needs to be done in a marketing campaign to enhance the advertising. So where does it sit? How many other touch points are required of a sort of consistent creative to make it work? What would enhance that activity? So I'm fascinated to know more about the results in the context of what spend is going where on that, versus what else do I need to do to enhance its effectiveness.
So, I mean, we've trailed this session as putting the where back into planning. Do you think that the where has disappeared? Louise, do you want to start off?
Yes, I do, actually. I'll tell a story, if I may, which is I've been doing this type of job since 1990. And in 1990, you could put an advert in the Sunday Times on a Sunday, and on a Monday, your call centre be 400 calls heavy with business, and put your feet up and do very little for the rest of the week. That's nearly 30 years ago. We had control of that where, and almost pure control, and there was very little distraction. Now, we've lost control of that where, because the plethora of opportunities in the marketplace is so huge. So I think as a client, as a budget controller, I'm trying to control a where which largely has disappeared out of my control.
I would say it's not gone, it's been somewhat neglected, perhaps. And I'd echo, my story doesn't go quite far as back, but I remember when I started as a media planner, I had like 5 channels, so it was really easy to think about the environment and where you kind of put that. I think it has been somewhat, as I say, neglected due to the rise of digital and the ways in which we can kind of target consumers. I think we've got very caught up in the capability of being able to talk to people rather than thinking about the strategy of how and why we need to talk to people. I think we're as an industry, we're obsessed by content, but its Siamese twin is context, because the two things are inextricably linked. And I think if we talk about being audience first, I think being truly audience first is being respectful of their mindset and the context within which we're trying to engage them. And I think this idea of respect is probably something that we've kind of lost quite a lot, and I think it needs to come back into the kind of the forefront in terms of planning.
How do you think we can bring that back, David? Do you have any ideas?
I think doing research like this really helps. I think to Eva's point, it is the audience understanding plus the context and marrying those two together. And I would disagree. I would say that the where has always been important, because you use the where as a proxy for a behaviour you're trying to get your message in and around, or a place, a time of day, a location, or it's just a proxy to find that audience. So I think the where has always been important, but it has become harder because there is a plethora of channels that you can choose from now. But I think the important thing is understanding what is the audience mindset in that context, and how do they use that channel, and how do they use that particular title or that particular publication, because then that adds more, I suppose, flavour and colour to that context, when you understand what is people's motivation for consuming that piece of content in that environment through that publisher. But it's hard, because there's just more and more data points out there to trawl through, and we'll probably come on and talk about it in this panel. Then you've got the whole issue of safety and brands becoming more cautious in that respect. So I don't have the answers, but I think more of a focus on audience, but also marrying it with this type of research, and not going just completely audience first, because then you go too far down in the other direction and you forget about context. So it is that marrying the two together.
It's interesting you bringing up the stuff about brand safety. Do you think, I mean, you've sort of said, do you think that advertisers are getting more cautious?
I would say that it's, if you're a brand manager, I think you do have pressures coming internally, and I completely respect that. And you have to protect the integrity of your brand. But on the other side, I think we do audiences a disservice. We are almost mixing two issues up around, is this content that creates a debate? It's just a point of view. It might not be the point of view that I agree with or support, but it's just expressing a point of view. And if we can't live in a world where people can express a point of view and we can have lively debate, then it's pretty, it's a pretty depressing place. But it's hard, because then you get, you get a social media storm, and brands just, they haven't got the time to manage that, and it's just another headache. And really, I can see, we're just not going to go there. It's just too hard for us to deal with, and we just don't want to get into the newspapers ourselves and be the story. So I understand, but I wonder whether there's a bit too much of going in the other direction. And I don't know. It's, again, it's a hard one to reconcile. I
wonder whether we're confusing brand safety with brand illegality. Obviously you don't want to be next to stuff that's illegal or dodgy, but to your point, have we sort of gone too far and actually said we don't want to be anything that expresses an opinion? Eva, how do you think we can, as an industry, be better advisors to our clients?
I think not using catch-all terms like safety is a good start point. I think if we all work on pieces of business and work with clients, then actually I think the conversation has to be one of brand appropriateness, because what's appropriate for one brand is going to be very different to another. Some brands build their entire kind of sort of brand platform on being slightly edgy and being slightly provocative. What is appropriate for them is entirely different to a brand that might be making products for new babies or something like that. And so actually it's incumbent upon us as agencies with our clients to work out what is appropriate for the brand, and to kind of take it from there, because I think it's a case of balancing risk and reward. And for some clients, the reward is kind of worth it, and for some it perhaps isn't. So I think it has to be addressed on a case-by-case basis. I think it's lazy to view it as one kind of subject. It's simply us as agencies advising our clients and working with our clients about where best to put their advertising, which is what media agencies have always done. Is just that the context of the conversations has changed a little, but it's still what we should be doing, and taking it on a case-by-case basis for what's right for the client is the right approach, not having this kind of catch-all term.
Louise, how does it work for you? I mean, you work in a lovely industry, it must be said. Who wouldn't want to market
I don't
holidays?
have a difficult job.
No.
I just open the door and people come, largely. But to Eva's point there, we can play very safe. We've got 5.2 million records on a database which cost us hundreds of thousands to put together. So I can play that really safe, because if you've been on a holiday with Hoteplan, largely 99% of people are ecstatic and will come back. And so this is a safe game. If I think about Ingham's Lakes and Mountains, which is a summer programme, we're carrying people who are aged between 60 and 80 and older, I might say. And inevitably, I'm going to lose people at the top end of that age group, which is a sad fact of life. And I need to acquire into that market. So I have to take a risk. We have to be creative. We have to be innovative. What I would say is PR is more risky than advertising. And I've had situations where I did look after safari holidays and promoted going to see elephants and rhino next to problems, zoos and tigers and issues, and avalanche stories next to promoting ski holidays. At least in advertising, you've got slightly more control, and there's a balance between the PR game and advertising. So I think as a brand, we have to take a risk. For me, it's about calculated risk, and sometimes surprise and delight, actually putting something into somewhere that you wouldn't expect. So we're playing it safe now. We're sponsoring, what has just finished, the Winter Olympics on Eurosport. This is a really safe place to be. It's not as arresting and attractive, maybe, as putting that somewhere completely different where you wouldn't expect it. So we have to have a contingency budget, which is risk.
Do you think, and David, you made a point about we're sort of doing audiences a disservice if we think that they only, we can only advertise next to lovely, happy content. It's a bit like not wanting to advertise in Game of Thrones because, there's lots of sex and violence, or not wanting to be next to a story about a serious investigation in the papers. What do you think about how audiences react? As a strategist, what's your sort of view on how audiences react to advertising if it's next to, strongly worded, kind of a strong opinion about something?
Again, I think possibly we do audience a disservice, and I think they can figure out, what is right and what is wrong, and I guess there'll always be a scale of that, audience to audience. But I guess it just comes back to the point of there are brands that are provocative, so they have more. They're more likely to take a risk, and they're happy to get into that space and not only be next to that article but also participate in that debate as well. Whereas for other brands, it's really it's not appropriate at all. And so horses for courses, I guess. Then that, and I suppose then it's our job as strategists to understand what their level of risk is, and where that might open opportunities for us to place that piece of marketing or that that messaging in an environment that matches the risk and the position of the brand and the sort of the personality of that brand as well. So lots of things that you have to be mindful of, but I guess it comes back to understanding the audience that you're after and understanding where does the brand sit, what are their comfort levels in all of this.
Do you think, we've over the last year, we've obviously had a lot of conversation, kicked off probably by Mark Pritchard's sort of, rallying cry and then echoed again by Keith Weed recently. Do you think the conversations are changing in your organisations?
We were discussing this actually the other week when Keith Weed had sort of come out and said his thing, and I think we netted out in terms of the kind of team that I sit on somewhere between scepticism and really welcoming the dialogue and the conversation. I think, you know, brand purpose, brands doing good, you know, that's all, you know, been something that we've talked about for a very long time, and that's applied to their product and their supply chain, but not necessarily their digital and, I guess, media supply chain. So I think it's a welcome debate. I think it's a debate we need to have. I don't know how many marketers are going to radically change their behaviour. You could read it as a slightly cynical sort of PR kind of a message that was kind of put out. I think what I take from it is that, and it kind of builds on the point that David was just making, which is that I think we tend to forget about the consumer experience and the user experience. And I think that needs to be, you know, that's so important to the where and the why of planning. It's really, really important to think about what we want people to feel as a result of an interaction with a piece of advertising. And then the conversations around what content it's next to kind of matter less so. I mean, I think fundamentally, yes, no brand should be investing in any kind of media that, you know, harms children, to kind of quote Keith himself. But I think it's an important debate we need to have. I don't know where it's going to end up.
What about for you, Louise?
In travel, 6 or 7 years ago, and I know there's 1 or 2 travel people here as well, a lot of money was diverted into digital, and almost too much. And I would actually say in the last 9 to 12 months, there's been more of a pullback to consider multi-channel. And I'm saying this because recently we've had phenomenal success in print ads for some of our holidays, and putting supplements into newspapers as well, Stella, Sunday Telegraph, for example. So I feel, and I watch this carefully because you have to manage your career. Am I an online specialist? Am I offline? Am I multi-channel? What am I? I felt that travel put a lot of money into online, and now we're coming back to a more balanced portfolio, which at least gives us a chance to avoid some of the tricky issues that we've been talking about. But it's also what works, where are people, and my gut feel, honestly, is that in the last 9 to 12 months, print has become more important, and using print wisely, like inserting good supplements, it has proved its worth for us.
I'd agree with that. I think there seems to be a greater understanding of, and it's research like this that really helps, of really understanding what channels are best at doing what kind of jobs. And to your, you know, there was lots of money thrown into digital, and now there's a lot of pulling back and understanding. Actually, you know, it's good at some things. It's not as good at doing other things. That creates a challenge when you see some of the sort of behaviour change in terms of how people are media consumption, and more of that going online. So it presents a challenge, I think, for publishers and their digital offerings from an advertising perspective, is how can we improve and evolve what we do from a sort of a brand building perspective in digital, because I think that's still got a long way to go, particularly to compete with more traditional media. But the eyeballs are shifting, so there's a bit of a catch-up to be done. But we definitely see a rebalancing, and where we might have been apologetic almost to put print or TV on the plan, now there seems to be a much more confidence of saying, well, that there's a reason why that is there, and there's a reason why digital is there, and they're doing different things, but in the mix, it's the right combination and the right channel mix for the job.
I think I'd add a really small point. Denise, we were at a conference about a month ago, and I can't remember who said it, but it was a quote that I took down, which was saying that you're going to invest in digital is like saying you're going to a restaurant and you're going to eat food. And I was like, that's a really good way of kind of summarising it. So I think that the conversation just needs to move on from using that really unhelpful term.
I think it's a nonsense word, digital, myself, because it's so much more than that. Okay, I feel like we've just skirted the surface of this conversation, and I'm sorry if I waffled on too much at the start. But anybody got a question or two before coffee? Just want to give you the opportunity. There's one just in the middle at the back, and then one here. There might be one over there as well.
Hi. Alex Rubens, OMD. First of all, yeah, the really good talk. I think I agree with everything you just said. I was wondering, though, that especially on the back of what Richard was talking about with the Cobra effect, and particularly Goodhart's law. So I just had a quick look in Richard's book, and for a quick quote. So when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And I'm wondering if the sort of the devil of what you've been talking about is CPM, or how media is reported. Obviously, it's a standardized way to compare across media. Do you think it's time for a new way to report on media? And if so, how would you do that?
I would say definitely. I think there's two answers. One, that just because I think digital felt like such a comfortable thing to invest in, because there were lots of ways you could measure it, but were you measuring the right thing? I think is a big question. I think also there's a kind of a key tenet of a lot of the IPA data bank studies that they've done sort of historically is the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. And efficiency being the tendency to do things that are easy to measure and are accountable, and effectiveness being actually what the right thing to do is, but it's less easy to measure, it's less accountable, and that what's effective isn't necessarily what's efficient. So I don't really have an answer, but I'd say yes, it is time for us to try and move the dial on how we measure that.
I think also just positioning measures in the right way. What is an intermediary measure versus what is ultimately your measure? There was talk in Catherine's speech around, I think another term is sort of price elasticity, and if you look at IPA, that they talk about that as really being a much stronger measure of brand health than awareness or consideration or just profit, and then understanding that all these other measures are just intermediary ones that get you there, but creating the right sort of hierarchy of those measures and KPIs, I think, is really critical, and something that we get tasked to do by clients regularly. So,
I think there's a question here, isn't there? Yeah.
Yes, hi. This is Alex from Resonance. First of all, thank you for this. I think it's extremely interesting. Thank you. I think my question is actually very similar to what was just asked. Around metrics. So I think, David, earlier you mentioned that part of the challenge in digital is a lot of data points to go through and so many channels. And I think there's also maybe some of the social partners on digital that have been very good at providing a lot of metrics that have been starting feeding the reporting side as well of the equation. And I feel like when you put that back into the context of the where and the brand building that you mentioned, the metrics have to change, and they have to be softer metrics. So is there an opportunity as well maybe for news brands to start maybe having a consistent and a more joined up approach on how to deliver softer metrics that satisfy clients? Because ultimately, if you still have to report back to clients, and if clients don't get anything on the back of a plan, they're not going to be happy with that shift unless they can see the money is being used wisely.
I suppose what we're seeing is clients wanting more than just, what's the CPM or what's the delivery, how many impressions, and actually what does that mean to my business? What's more of a sort of business outcome, and trying to translate some of these measures or KPIs or performance indicators into more business outcomes is something that's happening a lot more, and then trying to build models that sort of create relationships between these. So whether that's sort of econometrics or other types of data modeling, and I think now that we have increasing amounts of data and example of this piece of research, I suppose that is only going to increase all the time, yeah, I mean, I guess it's something that's just sort of starting to evolve now, as we sort of move beyond just reporting on standard metrics, and actually getting some consistency across channels and platforms as well. So a 3-second view on Facebook versus a 30-second TV spot. Those are two very, very different things, and when you dig into those, that you get very different metrics and very different performance that come out the back of that, and then the efficiency of those as well. Also, again, once you dig into the data of all of these things, actually you're really not comparing like for like, and so, but that's more of an industry-wide thing to try and get to some sort of a benchmark of measures that go across channels. So, but that's probably for another time.
I've got flashing red lights here, but I'm going to give Simon Redican a really small question, please.
Thanks, Denise. Well, you can give me a yes or no then for my question. I attend a lot of these conferences, and there's a sort of, I guess, an industry narrative that I think you get furious agreement at these conferences about the importance of context, the importance of safety and transparency, the overwhelming ROI evidence for the proven media, and the underinvestment in the proven media. And I'd like to know what's the internal narrative in agencies, because what we do see, despite all that, is increased investment with Google, Facebook, and pure play digital, despite everything that gets said at all these conferences. So is there a different narrative to the one I've outlined in agencies?
Good question.
That's not a small question.
It's not a small question. Is there a different narrative? God, it entirely depends on who you speak to in an agency, I would argue. I think strategists have one certain narrative that might not be the same all the way through the business. I think it's, I'm going to try and answer this really quickly, and I don't know that I'm going to do that justice. I think it's a debate that we're all having internally, and I think, intuitively, we do all feel that context is really, really important. I think there's a balance, again, between short-term and long-term requirements of our clients and trying to balance those things. And in terms of measuring stuff, we're often looking at dual ways of measuring short-term performance and also kind of longer-term equity. And I think it's, both bits of the kind of the piece are needed. I think we're just, as an industry, trying to find the centre of gravity there.
Louise, can you just give us a final word from a client perspective on the way that you measure success?
Well, I have to say that sometimes you have to believe in what you're doing and know over the years that it works. So back to the overview, which is, yes, you can measure some things. If you only did what you could measure, you'd be doing very little. And, that you wouldn't have long-term sustainability. So sometimes we do things that we can't quantify, but we know work. And I think it's also back to brand. We mustn't underspend on the value of the brand, because that is there for the long term. However many responses you get to an email, however many transactions, brand build is incredibly important.
Lovely. Well, I know that you might want a modicum of coffee. So thank you very much to my panel. Thank you for that discussion.